dim the lights. But other than that, you know, Vic was talking about health span, and I think that's a word, I mean, I loved it like 15 years ago, and now when you start to hear something over and over again, I feel like sometimes it loses its meaning. So I just kind of want to start by saying, I think we are all, we're interested in longevity, but what does that really mean? And I think to me, it means I want to maintain my identity, who I am, when I'm 80 or 90 years old. And the only way I'm going to be able to do that is if I maintain my health, my physical health, my cognitive health, my mental health. So what we're going to talk about today are some of the things that I think are what I like to call the 80-20. You know, you're going to put in 20% of the effort and you're going to get 80% of the benefits. And this is something that, you know, I don't know that it's that groundbreaking or mind-blowing in terms of, you've probably heard a lot of these things before, but I'm going to give you information that I think that'll be mind-blowing in that respect, where you're going to learn something new. And that's my goal. So we're going to talk a little bit about 3 different categories. First, micronutrients, and some of the most important ones, and how they affect the way you age and your disease risk. We're going to talk about certain phytochemical called sulforaphane, and how that is really important for stressing your body in a way that causes adaptations that are beneficial. And then we're going to talk about vigorous intensity exercise, and why I think that's one of the most important longevity drugs that we have. So let's start with the micronutrients part of my talk. We're going to start with vitamin D, we're going to get into omega-3, and then we're going to get into the multivitamin. So vitamin D, the word vitamin is a little bit misleading, because actually vitamin D gets converted into a steroid hormone. Steroid hormones, you may have heard of testosterone, you may have heard of estrogen, those are steroid hormones. Vitamin D3 also gets converted into a steroid hormone. What does that mean? It means it actually goes inside the nucleus of your cells, where all your DNA is, and it interacts with your DNA, and it activates genes, turns them on so they do things, and it deactivates certain ones that doesn't do certain things, and it does it in a very coordinated way. And you can imagine, if you don't have enough of this important hormone, things aren't going to be working properly, they're not going to be working correctly. It's a really important topic, because there is widespread insufficiency and deficiency globally. In the UK and the US, about 70% of the US population doesn't get enough vitamin D, something similar in the UK as well. And there's some reasons for that. The reasons have to do with the fact that we make it from UVB radiation from the sun. And why is it that we're not getting enough? Well, for one, when we're out in the sun, we're wearing sunscreen. Anything that blocks UVB radiation blocks the ability of your skin to make vitamin D3. So that's one reason. Of course, we're wearing sunscreen for other reasons. We don't want to, skin aging is an important aspect here, certainly something I'm concerned about. But also, if you're living in a region like Australia, where there's a lot of UV rays, melanoma is a big risk factor. Also, people are spending more time indoors. I mean, we are in a society now where we're spending time inside, at our cubicle, on a computer, indoors, just not getting enough vitamin D3. The other factors have to do with where you live. If you're in London, for example, many months out of the year, because of the location, it's a northern latitude, UVB radiation can't even make its way to the atmosphere, which is great for skin aging, terrible for vitamin D3. You're not going to be making enough vitamin D3. Age is another factor. So I see a lot of young faces in the audience here. That's amazing. Everyone young is interested in health. But like your parents, your grandparents, a 70-year-old makes 4 times less vitamin D3 from the same amount of sun exposure as their 20-year-old self. I mentioned sunscreen. Melanin is a natural sunscreen that many people from more south regions like Africa or Southeast Asia have. And so it's a natural sunscreen that protects you from the burning rays of the sun. Turns out it also blocks vitamin D3, and you have to spend more time in the sun to make as much vitamin D3 as someone that doesn't have that natural melanin. And then body fat. Ultimately, vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, so you make it in your skin, it gets stored in fat, but the more body fat that you have, the less vitamin D3 is available to be released into your bloodstream to then go to your liver and then your kidneys to be converted into the actual steroid hormone. So you may be making vitamin D, but you're not getting it to the places that it needs to go to become the actual hormone, which is what you need for it to do anything. So those are the real reasons why vitamin D deficiency and insufficiency is so prevalent. There's a simple solution. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But first, I want to talk about its role in aging. And I like to start with this slide because it's so compelling. And of course, we're not mice, and we're going to talk a lot about humans. But we do a lot of research with animals to understand mechanism and understand things that we can't do in humans. So these mice here, if you look at the top panel, the mouse here on the right-hand side is a vitamin D receptor knockout mouse. Sorry, it's on your left-hand side. It's a vitamin D receptor knockout mouse. That means it doesn't have a vitamin D receptor, so it's kind of like it's vitamin D deficient. That's a wild-type mouse. They're both about 4.5 months old. 4 months later, you can see the same mice. The vitamin D receptor knockout mouse it's a rapidly aging model, like a progeria aging model. Its hair fell out, its skin is wrinkling, its vision lost, its bones are brittle, organs are failing. Vitamin D is regulating over 5% of the human genome. That's over 1,000 genes. It's a lot of different genes, many of which are also involved in longevity. But as I mentioned, we're not mice, we're humans. So what about humans? So we turn to what's called Mendelian randomization to look at the human evidence. And what that is essentially because vitamin D3 made from the sun gets converted into, in a two-step process, the hormone, there are actually genes in our body that make enzymes that do that. And we're all different. There's a lot of individual variation here. We have different versions of genes. Some people have ones that are doing great, very robust. Other people have versions that maybe not so good. So we can turn to genetics to look at outcomes that are really related to diet or lifestyle or vitamins, for example, in this case. And so people that have these variations in genes that are involved in converting vitamin D3 to the hormone, and they have it where they're not doing it so well, they actually have genetically low vitamin D levels. It has nothing to do with being in the sun, nothing to do with being outside, because you might go, well, there's all these studies out there showing that low vitamin D is associated with a higher mortality. But you might say they just might not be healthy people. They're not going outside. They're not exercising outside in the sun. They're not, they're just not active. And I think that's a fair argument. What we know from Mendelian randomization is that these people with genetically low vitamin D levels, they have a higher all-cause mortality. That means they're dying from all non-accidental causes of death, like cancer, Alzheimer's disease, for example, respiratory diseases. They have a higher respiratory disease rate as well than people that don't have genetically low vitamin D levels. And I think that's pretty good evidence that we are talking about something that's very important that's affecting our life expectancy. We also know from a variety of studies, this study here is kind of a very small study, showing that vitamin D does regulate our biological aging as marked and measured by epigenetic aging clocks. I'll keep this brief, but really essentially, everyone in this room, we all have a birthday, we're all born on a certain day, we all have an age. I'm going to be 48 next week. However, we also have rates in which our organs are aging. And scientists like Dr. Steve Horvath, who sort of pioneered this technique to be able to measure our epigenetic age, which is essentially looking at our DNA, and it's looking at these chemical changes on our DNA called methyl groups. It's just a carbon with 3 hydrogens. And they have a certain pattern that they take with age. And so it's a very, very sensitive test that can look at this pattern and how that pattern changes with age. And depending on the type of epigenetic aging test, it can very, very accurately predict your chronological age, or depending on a different type of test that uses other types of inputs to basically come up with this calculation, it can measure what's called your biological age. And that really is how your cells are aging in your body, independent of how old you are. And so there are things that we know that accelerate aging. Smoking, right? Smoking, obesity, excessive alcohol drinking. We also know that vitamin D deficiency accelerates epigenetic aging. So people that are vitamin D deficient are aging at a rapid rate. And so this study that I'm showing you here on this slide shows people that started off vitamin D deficient and then supplemented with 4,000 IUs of vitamin D per day for about 6 weeks. After that 6 weeks, they reversed their epigenetic aging, their biological age, by almost 2 years. Now, since the generation of this slide, there have been other studies that have come out, larger ones. One of the biggest ones was the Berlin trial, and that was in Berlin. Over 1,000 participants. And what researchers did was they started with this population sample, measured all of their vitamin D levels, which is rare, but they basically wanted to know the starting point. Some people were deficient, some people weren't. Then they gave them a vitamin D supplement for about a year or so, and then measured their vitamin D levels after, and also measured their epigenetic age. Turns out that only the people that were deficient at the start of this trial slowed their biological age, but they slowed it by about 2.6 years. So again, the point here, what I'm trying to make is you want to avoid deficiency. You're going to have to measure your vitamin D levels to make sure that what you are taking is helping you avoid deficiency and insufficiency. We also know from many studies that vitamin D deficiency is correlated with an increased dementia risk. In fact, you can find studies out there showing as high as an 80% increased dementia risk. Again, you have that problem. Well, is it just that those people are kind of unhealthy, right? People that are unhealthy don't go out in the sun as much, they're not exercising as much. And so again, we turn to that Mendelian randomization of genetics. And even there, we see about a 50% increased risk in people that have genetically low vitamin D levels. That really sort of, I think, strengthens that, what's called observational data. And then, on top of that, we also have data showing that people that supplement with vitamin D, the opposite happens. They have a decreased dementia risk. They have about a 40% lower dementia risk. So prevention is the key. But it's not always prevention. We'll talk about some treatment in a minute. In addition to the dementia reduction, vitamin D is also important for structural changes in the brain. So something called white matter hyperintensities can lead to a certain type of dementia. And essentially why it's called that is if you look at your brain on an MRI, there's like these little white spots that turn up. And it's really, really bad. You do not want those. Studies have found that people, for every 10 nanomole per liter increase in vitamin D levels, there was a decrease in the propensity to have these white matter hyperintensity, these structural changes in the brain that are really indicative of vitamin D. And this was in a dose-dependent manner. It just kept going and kept going. So there was no end in that. So I mentioned that prevention is key, but what if you know someone, what if you have a family member that already has mild cognitive decline, the early stages of dementia or Alzheimer's disease, right? Maybe they have Alzheimer's disease. What about them? Well, there have been 2 randomized controlled trials. This is obviously the gold standard compared to a placebo, both one in mild cognitive decline, patients with mild cognitive decline, and another one, patients with actual Alzheimer's disease. These different patients were given either a low dose, in my opinion, of vitamin D, so this was 800 IUs a day, or they were given a placebo for a year. And after that year, what was found is, in both groups, their cognitive function improved, their executive function, markers of cognitive function all improved, and also markers of Alzheimer's disease improved as well. So it really goes to show that even a low dose of vitamin D might be beneficial. If you think about it, vitamin D is regulating a lot of different genes, many of them in the brain, including something called clotho. This is very important for brain health. It's also important for longevity. So again, it's literally binding to your DNA, it recognizes a very specific sequence, and it's turning genes on. And if you don't have enough vitamin D, that's not happening properly. So it's really, really important. There's a lot of different ways that vitamin D affects brain health. I'm not going to go into detail, but it really does affect immune function, plays a role in reducing inflammation. Neuroinflammation is a really big cause of neurodegenerative diseases like dementia, Alzheimer's disease. It also enhances neuroplasticity, it affects neurotransmitters, it affects mitochondrial function, and it seems to play a role in amyloid clearance as well. So how do you know if you're getting enough vitamin D? And I apologize that these levels are US. So deficiency is 20 nanograms per milliliter or less. In the UK, usually they do nanomoles per liter, so you really just have to multiply that by 2.5. Inadequacy is more than 20, but you're less than 30 nanograms per mil. And then sufficiency would be, I would say between 40 to 60, but anything above 30 nanograms per mil is really what I would say is more sufficiency. So maybe that would be 100, 150 nanomoles per liter if you're in the UK. And there's a really simple solution here. Most people can benefit between 4,000 and 5,000 IUs of vitamin D per day. I say most people, but you really need to get a blood test after supplementation, at least a month or so after supplementation, because of those genetic SNPs that I talk about and the individual variation. Some people actually have to take a much higher level of vitamin D, a much higher dose of vitamin D to get to that sufficient level. It's not super, super common, but it's common enough. It's common enough. So the importance of getting a blood test can't be overstated. Okay, We're going to move on to the next important micronutrient, that's omega-3. As the name implies, omega-3 fatty acids are 3 different fatty acids. ALA, that's the plant version, that's found in things like walnuts or chia seeds or flax seeds. That's not the one that's the most important that we're going to talk about. EPA and DHA, those are the really important omega-3 fatty acids. Those are found in seafood, like fatty fish, like salmon or mackerel. There's a study out of Harvard a few years back that identified not getting enough omega-3 from seafood was one of the top 6 preventable causes of death, similar to non-smoking, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and type 2 diabetes. So in other words, not getting enough of these omega-3 fatty acids from your food was like having these diseases, but nobody's thinking about it that way. Nobody's thinking about the importance of omega-3s that way. So let's talk a little bit about it. How do you measure omega-3 levels? The best way to measure them is what's called the omega-3 index. This is a measure of your omega-3 fatty acid levels in your red blood cells. That's a long-term marker of omega-3. Your red blood cells take about 120 days to turn over. So it's not just reflecting what you had for dinner the past couple of days or the past couple of weeks. So you want to get your omega-3 index levels measured. Studies out of Dr. Bill Harris's lab is where this originated from, and he showed that people with what's called a high omega-3 index, so that would be 8% or more, had a 90% reduced risk of having sudden cardiac death compared to people with a low omega-3 index, which is about 4%. And in the United States, I don't know about the UK, I should pull that statistic out, but I know in the United States, every 30 seconds, someone dies from a heart attack. So if you end up having a heart attack, you don't want sudden cardiac death to happen, and it seems a pretty simple solution to avoid sudden cardiac death, and that is making sure you're getting enough omega-3 and you're in that 8% high omega-3 index range. But what's more interesting is that omega-3 index is also associated with a life expectancy increase. In fact, people with the high omega-3 index of 8% have a 5-year increased life expectancy compared to people with a low omega-3 index of 4%. The 4% omega-3 index is the average. In the US, we have about a 5% omega-3 index, so pretty close to the low. In Japan, their omega-3 index on average is about 10%. And when you know, in Japan, they have a 5-year increased life expectancy compared to people in the US, both men and women. Of course, that's just a correlation. There could be other factors as well, but it's still interesting. But what I think is even more interesting is when you stratify that data and you look at people that smoke and don't smoke. That's what was really mind-blowing to me, because we all know smoking is terrible for your health. It's actually really bad for your heart. Most people are worried about cancer and lung cancer. Yeah, that's a thing to worry about, but that happens in a linear manner. The more cigarettes you smoke, the more you have an increased risk of getting lung cancer. With cardiovascular disease, it doesn't take much to really mess up your heart in smoking. It's not linear at all. So smoking is really bad, we know that. So what Bill did was he looked at the omega-3 index in non-smokers and smokers, and then he looked at their life expectancy. And as you would imagine, people that don't smoke and also have a high omega-3 index have the longest life expectancy. You can see that with the green curve here. So on the bottom, this is age. On the top, this is the omega-3 index. Sorry, age and then survival. The people that had the lowest life expectancy in the red were smokers with the low omega-3 index. And then the orange and blue curves are overlaid perfectly. So smokers that were eating seafood or supplementing, they had the same mortality risk as non-smokers with a low omega-3 index. So basically not getting enough omega-3 was like smoking. And I know like people in the room that might be smoking are going, yes, I can take my omega-3 and have the same life expectancy as a non-smoker. But I just think it's kind of mind-blowing to think about that. Like not having a high omega-3 index was like smoking for your overall mortality risk. Yet again, it's another way people aren't thinking about the things that they're not getting from their diet that they should be getting. They're not eating enough seafood, and we're supplementing with omega-3, which is another way to get these omega-3 fatty acids. But we also have strong data from randomized placebo-controlled trials. Again, the gold standard. We have 3 different trials. Reduce-It trial, this was a purified EPA form given to patients with some type of cardiovascular disease in conjunction with their already whatever medications they were taking, or a placebo. After 5 years, the people taking the purified EPA, it's called VASIPA, they had 25% less likely risk of having a heart attack and a stroke and other cardiovascular events compared to people taking a placebo. The VITAL study was another study. This was also, so the REDUCE-IT study was actually a high-dose EPA. It was 4 grams a day. The VITAL study was much lower. It was only 800 milligrams a day, and it included both EPA and DHA. It's called VESA. Those individuals also supplemented with omega-3 for 5 years or a placebo. And the secondary outcomes, looking at specifically like heart attack and stroke, those individuals also had a much, much lower percentage, so a 17% lower risk of total coronary heart disease, and then another 28% for the heart risk, heart attack going down as well. So there's another trial called the STRENGTH trial. I'm not going to really focus on that because that is a form of omega-3 that's free fatty acid form, not really a good form, but you can ask me about that later if you have questions about it. Why is omega-3 so protective? Well, there's lots of reasons. For one, it's a very important regulator of resolving inflammation. Like, we need inflammation in our body. That's how our immune system is active. It fights off pathogens, viruses, bacteria. But the problem is that our diet, our lifestyle, things we're not getting, things that we are exposed to, it's causing chronic inflammation. Gut health, right? Leaky gut, as it's called, or gut permeability. So really, the important thing here is that these omega-3s are resolving inflammation. So when your body is metabolizing omega-3s like DHA, even EPA, it's making resolvins. Very important. It also directly, like EPA directly, can lower inflammation as well. But another really important thing it's doing is it's affecting membrane fluidity. And what that means is it's an important component of all your cell membranes, including the cells lining your vascular system, your cardiovascular system, your blood vessels, your arteries. And that's really important because those cells you want them to be fluid, you want them to be moving, right? You want them to be malleable. You don't want them to be stiff. And when they don't have enough of those omega-3s in those cells, they get stiffer. So you get cardiovascular problems. So omega-3 is very, very, very important for cardiovascular health. But there's been some recent evidence it's also important for slowing that biological aging, as measured by epigenetic aging clocks. And this has been some exciting evidence. Do you guys mind taking the counter off for me? Is that possible? It's kind of blocking my view of things. I don't know if you guys can do that. But anyways, so there's been some interesting data, and it's dated back like over 10 years, where the first studies that were done were looking at people's diets. High omega-3 intake is associated with a lower epigenetic age. But since then, there's been newer epigenetic clocks developed, there's been better techniques, and there's been randomized controlled trials. Let's talk about some of those. First and foremost, it seems as though there's a threshold you have to reach to slow epigenetic aging, and that threshold is about 1.1 grams per day. It's actually a little bit lower for men. For men, it was about 0.46 grams per day. But that was the threshold. If you were getting less than 1.1 grams per day, you weren't experiencing the slowing of epigenetic aging. And by the way, many of the epigenetic aging clocks that are developed are very sensitive to inflammation. So you would imagine that because omega-3 fatty acids are so important for resolving inflammation, that those clocks are going to really pick that up. It's going to pick up that anti-inflammatory effect. But I think what's more interesting is some of the randomized controlled trials, and there was a recent one done in Switzerland. It was I think it was like a 2-year trial. And interestingly, the trial was omega-3, vitamin D, or resistance training, with a combination of either omega-3 and vitamin D, or then all three. And the participant population that they started with already had normal levels of vitamin D, and they were already, like 88% of them were physically active, which is unheard of. Like, if you got the US population, that never would have happened. But so these people were like pretty healthy to start with. So the only nutrient by itself, or the only intervention by itself that actually slowed epigenetic aging was omega-3 alone. When you combined in the vitamin D, even though most of those participants already had pretty adequate levels of vitamin D, there seemed to still be a synergy. So people that took omega-3 fatty acids, and it was like a gram, it was about a gram a day, and they took a lower dose of vitamin D. I don't remember off the top of my head what it was, but it might have been 1,000 or 2,000 IUs of vitamin D. It slowed epigenetic aging, or biological aging, by about 3.3 months. And then if you did all three combined, and the resistance training, by the way, it was like, it's not like probably what you guys think. It was more, they're doing body weight exercises. I mean, they're doing something. They're using their body for resistance, and it was good. But it wasn't like they were deadlifting, or squatting with a barbell. So all three reduced biological aging by 3.8 months. And you might go, oh, after 2 years, that's it? But you have to realize that this stuff is combining after every 2 years, 2 to 3 years, and you have another, almost 4 months of reduction, and another 4 months, right? And then as you go on, decade after decade, that stuff adds up and makes a real difference. And it was correlated with actual functional outcomes. So that 3.8 months reduction in biological age also was associated with reduced pre-frailty by about 40%, and also reduced invasive cancer by about 60%, which is pretty phenomenal because it's really showing that even after that 2 year of supplementation and that almost 4 months in reduction in biological age, there's a real world consequences to that as well. Okay, I'm going to shift to the last, and I don't want to say micronutrient because it's micronutrients, plural, because the reality is, and I have a US population here because I'm from the US, and that's mostly what I'm looking at that data. But the reality is, I think, even people in Europe, this also applies. We're not getting enough of these important vitamins and minerals and fatty acids and amino acids from our diet. And the reason we're not getting them from our diet is because we're eating a lot of processed foods. We're not eating real whole foods. So micronutrients are important because we have to get them from our diet. Why do we have to get them from our diet? Because they are running our metabolism. They are running biological functions like neurotransmitter function, like immune function, like electrical signals in our body. They're doing stuff in our body that's very important. That's why we need them. So people don't realize that it's not just about preventing death right away. These micronutrients, when you don't have them over time, they cause insidious damage that essentially accelerates aging, accelerates the brain aging, increases cancer risk. But it's not something that you can look in the mirror and see. Like, you can't look in the mirror and go, oh, I got DNA damage today more than I had yesterday, right? Like, you can't see DNA damage. Like, you can see a wrinkle, you can see a new funny mole pop up, right? Those are things that you can see, they're tangible, they feel real to you. But the stuff like, I guess even inflammation, you can feel bloated, or you can kind of feel that sleepiness, that happens when you're inflamed. But you can't see all the damage that's happening all the time. And that's kind of the problem, because it's insidious, right? So lots of deficiencies here. I don't want to go through all the numbers, but half the population in the US is not getting enough magnesium. We have 35% not getting enough vitamin K, 60% not getting enough vitamin E, 25% not getting enough vitamin C. I was like, really? People still aren't getting enough vitamin C? So 80 to 90% of both the US and global populations not getting enough omega-3. That's the real big one. And we already talked about vitamin D, but that's not really coming from our diet, although some fatty fish have vitamin D. It's mostly from sun exposure. So there's a lot of gaps in our micronutrients. It has to do with the foods we're eating, but it also has to do with our soils having depleted with a lot of these important micronutrients as well. And that's a whole other can of worms to talk about another time. But what I love talking about with respect to multivitamins is that, guess what? They do something. Like, if you've heard people say multivitamins are useless, they're wrong. They're wrong. And they're wrong because we have now 3 large randomized controlled trials. These are called the COSMOS studies that looked at older adults, these are 65 years and older, that were given a standard, your standard run-of-the-mill multivitamin. It was Centrum Silver. It's not like the bougiest, best vitamin that I would take, but it's probably very affordable. They gave it to older adults for a couple of years, or they gave them a placebo. And then they measured how their brain was aging by so many different tests that I could probably spend 15 minutes talking about. But we're gonna get to the punchline here, which is the multivitamin after a couple of years slowed brain aging globally by 2.1 years. And it slowed epigenetic brain aging by almost 5 years. Episodic brain aging by almost 5 years. And episodic memory is the kind of memory that's involved in remembering experiences, remembering people, like those sorts of things that seems to decline with age. It slowed it by almost 5 years. That's huge for us, for our parents, for our grandparents. The easiest thing you could do for yourself, or your parents, or your grandparents is give them a multivitamin to take every day. It is doing something. And in fact, there was a subset of the COSMOS trials. It was a little bit of a shorter trial that was just recently published, showed that it also slowed epigenetic aging. It only slowed it by like 5 months, after a couple of years, which you might go, 5 months. Again, it's compounding, 2 years, plus 2, decade after decade after decade, right? It makes a difference. It's slowing the way your DNA is aging, it's slowing the way your cells are aging, and it's definitely slowing the way your brain's aging. So I think it's really important, one of the easiest things people can do. And now you guys are armed with the information why. And when someone tells you that a multivitamin is useless, you can be like, you're wrong. and I hope you do. Share the information. All right, let's wrap up this part of my talk. Whether or not to supplement, vitamin D, 3 supplements. I think 4,000 IU a day is a good start. Omega-3 fatty acids. How do you get from a low index of 4% to a high index of 8%? Well, Bill Harris has shown that about 1.6 to 2 grams a day can get someone, for the most part, from a low to a high level. Not much. And again, if you remember, it took about 1.1 grams to at least slow that epigenetic aging. Multivitamin, easy peasy. I mean, they use Centrum Silver. You guys can do better. All right, we're going to shift gears and talk about one of my favorite phytochemicals, sulforaphane. In case you haven't heard of that, you're gonna come out telling everyone about sulforaphane. So sulforaphane is something that's not necessarily found in cruciferous vegetables. The precursor of it is found in cruciferous vegetables. These are broccoli, kale, cruciferous cabbage, bok choy, cauliflower, that family of vegetables. It turns out that this precursor forms sulforaphane after the plant is somehow torn or chewed. It's actually a natural defense that they use to ward off insects. And so when we chew the plant, sulforaphane is formed, and then we get sulforaphane in our body. And what sulforaphane does is it's the major natural dietary activator of a very, very important system in our body, a system that is involved in dealing with all kinds of stress. It's called the NRF2 pathway. And NRF2 it's like a master regulator of all these things in our body that are very beneficial. We're going to just focus on a couple of them, but what it does is it goes in, much like vitamin D, it goes in and turns on different genes and turns off different genes. So studies have found that sulforaphane, basically, it activates NRF2, and this can increase a very important antioxidant in our body and our brain called glutathione. In fact, there are 2 human studies that show that sulforaphane very robustly increases glutathione in the plasma and also in the brain. They showed that by fMRI imaging. That's very, very important. But the reason it's doing that is because it's increasing natural cellular defense pathways. It's increasing phase 2 detoxification enzymes. So these are enzymes that are involved in helping our body detoxify all these chemicals that we're exposed to. And we're going to talk about some of those. But it's really, really important because we are living in a world now where we're exposed to a lot of different chemicals, like air pollution. Very, very, very important. It also deactivates enzymes in our body that convert things that we eat or we're exposed to that are called pro-carcinogens. They're not necessarily a carcinogen yet, but our body converts it to a carcinogen through these enzymes. And NRF2 activation stops that from happening. And this all comes back to sulforaphane, which is highly found in broccoli, and even more highly found in the sprout broccoli. So broccoli sprouts actually contain 100 times more sulfur. I'm saying sulforaphane, but I just told you it's not actually sulforaphane. It's the precursor of sulforaphane, but you can think about it like sulforaphane if that helps you. So let's talk about some human evidence, because I think this is pretty robust and impressive. Watercress. People that ate watercress, 85 grams a day for 8 weeks, they decreased their DNA damage, oxidative DNA damage and DNA lesions by 24%, 17%. That's huge. I did a lot of work in my postdoc measuring DNA damage. That's huge. A very, very impressive drop in DNA damage. DNA damage, again, is a precursor for cancer. It's also, when you damage your DNA is the blueprint to make proteins. Things aren't working properly. You're not making things properly. Like, it's damaging stem cells. You're not making as many stem cells to replenish tissues in your body. You don't want DNA damage. It accelerates aging and it increases cancer risk. Broccoli, 250 grams a day for 10 days. This was done in smokers because smokers have a lot of oxidative DNA damage. Smoking is like one of the best things you can do if you want to increase your oxidative DNA damage. Well, they decreased their lesions by 40%, and they increased their oxidative resistance enzymes by 23%. Pretty big, just after 10 days. Brussels sprouts, that's another cruciferous vegetable I didn't mention, probably because if I eat too many, I get really gassy. But if you eat 300 grams a day, your spouse won't like you, but after 3 weeks, you will lower your oxidative damage by about 30%, which again, this is all very impressive. These are big, big numbers. Sulforaphane is also chemopreventative. What I mean by that, it helps prevent cancer. Again, a lot of this doing, because it's lowering DNA damage, which leads to cancer, but it's also helping our bodies get rid of toxins, which also increase cancer risk. And a big one here is benzene acrolein. So benzene is a carcinogen. It's found in cigarette smoke, if you smoke cigarettes, but it's also found in air pollution. Air pollution, wildfires, also a lot of benzene. Benzene is a carcinogen that does increase cancer risk. There have been now a couple of studies out of China where air pollution is very high, showing that individuals that took a broccoli sprout extract, which is high in sulforaphane, they were able to start the excretion of benzene by 61% after just 24 hours. So they literally started increasing their benzene by 61% after 24 hours. I can think of a lot of people that's important for, like firefighters, obviously smokers, but just everyone. We're living in a place now where we're breathing this stuff in, whether we like it or not, particularly in cities like London and other big cities, right? Acrolein is another one. It increased the excretion of acrolein by about 23%. Acrolein is also found in air pollution, but it's mostly, our exposure comes through cooking foods or our diet. So it's helping excrete, and I'm just mentioning two compounds here. The enzymes that it's activating are excreting a lot of other toxins as well. It's also been shown men with like earlier sort of low risk prostate cancer, they supplemented with a supplement that had high sulforaphane levels. They did 60 milligrams a day for 6 months, and it slowed the doubling of PSA, that biomarker that's measured to look at the progression of prostate cancer. It slowed it by almost 90% after that 6 months, which is pretty astounding. Again, that has a lot to do with it's activating anti-inflammatory pathways, it's activating antioxidant pathways, it's activating detoxification pathways that are leading to the inflammation and the oxidation, right? It's just like, it's doing so many beneficial things. And then interestingly, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but topical sulforaphane seems to lower skin redness and inflammation when you expose it to UV light as well. So it seems to really, there's an interesting topical use for it as well. That hasn't really been explored. And then lastly, I'll just mention a couple of studies that were done in mice that were injected with tumors. Again, back to the chemo preventative, it also seems to be helping. I don't want to say treat, because that when, if you had cancer, I'm not gonna tell someone to go take sulforaphane, but I want to talk about some of the interesting preclinical data. So animals that were injected with an aggressive type of prostate cancer, they were supplemented with sulforaphane. It reduced the metastasis of that cancer to other tissues by up to 63%, between 50 and 63%. Breast cancer stem cells, these are the most dangerous type of cancer because they are stem cells that are regenerating at a rapid rate and making more cancer cells. Those were injected into animals. Sulforaphane, in those animals that were given sulforaphane, it decreased the cancer stem cell population by up to 80%, and it reduced tumor growth by about 50%. And then lastly, colon cancer mouse models, so mice were injected with colon cancer, and it lowered their precancerous lesions by about 44%. So very compelling data. Sulforaphane is an important dietary activator of the NRF2 pathway. So the question is, are you eating your broccoli sprouts or your Brussels sprouts or your broccoli? And that's something you should be doing. And I think you can. I used to sprout back in the day. I don't do that anymore. But people can do sprouts, and that is a way to get sulforaphane. Cooked broccoli, unfortunately, when you cook cruciferous vegetables, the enzyme that converts the precursor into sulforaphane is heat sensitive, so you lose some of that. There's a little hack there. There's been a study or two that have come out showing that if you add mustard seed powder to your cooked broccoli, mustard seed is also from the cruciferous family, you can increase the bioavailability of that precursor by fourfold. So you're getting fourfold more of sulforaphane from your cooked broccoli if you add mustard seed powder than if you didn't. And then the other option is to supplement. That's what I choose to do. You do have to be careful. Sulforaphane is not a very stable molecule, so you have to find a good supplement. Like I said, I used to grow broccoli sprouts, but it's too much work. Although if people like doing that, go for it. So right now I do take a supplement, and I take alcohol because it's one of the most evidence-based supplements out there. There's about 12 different clinical studies using it, showing that it really does seem to have beneficial effects in both humans and also in preclinical studies as well. And then the last part of my talk I'm going to zoom through is vigorous exercise. And I'm probably most excited about this because there's all this new data coming out. People hear about vigorous exercise. They think, it has to be like an hour long. You have to do it and then be tired for the rest of the day. And it's just not the case. There's new data that's come out that's you can do 4 minutes of vigorous exercise a day, and have a 36% reduction in all-cause mortality, and also in cancer-related mortality, and a 30% reduction in cardiovascular-related mortality after 4.4 minutes a day of vigorous exercise. What is vigorous exercise? It's the kind of exercise that you do that you can't really talk because you're ready, right? Like, it's not like, you can't like have a conversation. Your heart rate's getting up, depending on how physically active you are, 80% max heart rate, something like that. But the talk test is nice because you can kind of say a couple of words, but that's about it. Like, you have to take some breaths. It's like a couple of words come out. That's the vigorous type of exercise. And it's so much more powerful than we thought. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but it's really, really the most powerful longevity drug. Cardiorespiratory fitness is a marker of your fitness level. Vigorous exercise is something that really does improve it. We know that people with a low cardiorespiratory fitness, like the lowest of the low, going anywhere above that has benefits. I mean, if you just go from low normal or below normal to low normal, you're getting like a 2-year increased life expectancy. If you go up to the upper limit, you're getting 5-year increased life expectancy. We also know from a variety of studies that people with the elite highest level of their cardiorespiratory fitness, they have a 5-year increased life expectancy compared to people with the low. They have an 80% lower all-cause mortality, and they even have a 20% lower all-cause mortality compared to people with a higher cardiorespiratory fitness, but just not elite. So cardiorespiratory fitness, again, it's when I say it's a marker of your fitness level, it's really just measuring how well you can take the oxygen you breathe in, move it to your heart, have your heart then bring it to other organs like your muscles, your brain, right? So it's usually measured in the lab. It can be measured directly in the lab by someone doing their maximal effort of exercise. It doesn't have to necessarily be measured that way. That's called VO2 max. It can be estimated by a variety of different ways, but ultimately the way to think about it is it's just being able to use that oxygen you breathe in and move it to places like your muscles and your brain, right? And it's really important as well, because you don't want everything that you do to be a maximal effort. You don't want to be out of breath walking around your house. You don't want to be out of breath walking to your car. People with a low cardiorespiratory fitness are like that. In fact, low cardiorespiratory fitness was a marker for high all-cause mortality as much as smoking, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and hypertension. So having a low cardiorespiratory fitness was really like having a disease, even if you don't have any clinical diseases that a doctor would define as a disease. Being sedentary, not being physically active, is a disease. It increases disease risk like other diseases. So think of it as a disease. You don't want to be sedentary. Why vigorous intensity exercise? Because we know that it improves cardiorespiratory fitness, and many studies have shown this, and that's important because other types of exercise, like moderate intensity exercise, this would be like brisk walking. People that do that for 150 to 300 minutes a week, still about 40% of them could not improve their cardiorespiratory fitness. It's a coin toss, right? Like, you don't want to be that person, 50-50 chance, well, I do my 300 minutes of brisk walking, and I still can't improve my cardiorespiratory fitness. Guess what? Those individuals that added in some vigorous exercise, like high-intensity interval training, they were able to improve their cardiorespiratory fitness. So there's a lot of different protocols out there to improve cardiorespiratory fitness. The key here is finding one that you love, finding one that you're going to be consistent with. And I talk a lot about the Norwegian 4x4. It's not for everyone. It's more of an intense protocol. It's 4 minutes of doing exercise at an intensity that's intense for you, and that you can maintain that intensity for the entire 4 minutes. So you're really going hard, but it's not an all-out sprint. You're going hard, but maintaining the same intensity for 4 minutes. And then you get a 3-minute recovery where your heart rate comes down, you clear the lactate, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You're basically recovering, and then you get back at it. And so you do that 4 times. That's what's called a Norwegian 4x4. It is one of the most evidence-based ways and methods to improve cardiorespiratory fitness, but there's other ways as well. A 1 minute on, 1 minute off, done 6 times, done 10 times. That also can increase cardiorespiratory fitness. And there's other ways, just getting your heart rate up and doing it multiple times, like maybe, again, like 6 times. Like, so you're doing it like a 6 minute. So 1 minute, 1 minute off, 1 minute on, 1 minute off. That also has really, really been shown to improve cardiorespiratory fitness as well. We know that vigorous intensity exercise is also important to reverse the aging of our heart. And this is probably really important for you guys, but also for your parents, because this study was done in 50-year-olds. Maybe your parents are a little older than that, but the study was in 50-year-olds that didn't have any diagnosable diseases other than they were sedentary, so they weren't physically active. And what Ben Levine did at the University of Dallas, Southwest in Dallas, he took these 50-year-olds and he put them in two groups. He said, okay, one group, I'm going to put them on a pretty intensive exercise program, and the other group, they're going to do some like stretching, yoga stuff to make them think they're getting the actual treatment. So it was a sham or placebo control. The exercise program was intense. It didn't start like that out the gate, right? So it was progressively loading. But ultimately, at the end of the study, about 6 months into the end of the 2-year study, individuals were exercising about 5 hours a week, and they were doing a lot of vigorous intensity. They're doing cardio, they're jogging. They did the Norwegian 4x4. Sometimes they did it twice a week, sometimes they did it once a week. So they mixed in high intensity interval training, and it is for 2 years. And what Ben measured was the structural aging of their heart. So as we age, our hearts get smaller and they get stiffer. And this really increases our risk for cardiovascular disease. It also makes it where we can't exercise as good as well. But so that's really important. After those 2 years of that training, those individuals that did it reversed their aging of their heart by about 20 years. So their hearts, even though they were 52 at the end of the trial, when you structurally looked at them, they looked like a 33-year-old heart. Massive change in the structural aging of the hearts. So inspiring that we can do something at age 50 that can so profoundly affect the way our age and our disease risk. And really does require just a little bit of effort and discipline. It's also really important for the brain. Immediately, a 10-minute vigorous intensity exercise can improve executive function and cognitive function, impulse control. It completely rewires the brain in just after 10 minutes of doing it. You're getting working memory improvements. You're getting, again, the executive impulse control and executive function improvements. It's really, really, like if you do this 10-minute vigorous exercise, which is something I love to do, you'll notice it. Like you'll feel better, you'll feel sharper, like you're better, in cognitive control. And it doesn't take long. Part of that is because vigorous exercise is when you're pushing that threshold and you're forcing your muscles to make something called lactate. Lactate is, as people once thought, it was like a metabolic byproduct. It's actually not. It's a signaling molecule. It's a way for your muscles to communicate with other organs, with the brain, with the heart, with your liver, with your kidneys. So it actually gets taken up into all these organs really rapidly, because they're hungry for it. It is an energy source as well, so lactate can be used as an energy. In fact, it's energetically favorable to use it compared to glucose. But the real interest is in the signaling molecule. It's a mode of communication from your muscles to the other organs, because when you're working out, it's stressful on your body. And your body's like, how do I deal with this stress? I gotta make sure next time I see it, I'm better at handling that stress. That's adaptation. And so lactate is playing a role in adaptation. So one of the things that it's doing is it's getting into the brain. The brain is really, really hungry for the lactate. It really does consume it. And there's been studies showing that after exercise, lactate really goes into the brain. And in the brain, what it does is it increases something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. BDNF goes up. And brain-derived neurotrophic factor is, as the name implied, a growth factor for your brain. It's involved in growing new neurons in the hippocampus. That's the part of your brain involved in learning and memory. It's involved in neuroplasticity. That's the ability of your brain to change with changing environment, adapt to a changing environment, right? Exercise, people think about exercise, it's working your muscles hard, it's working your lungs hard. It's also, your brain is also working hard. Your brain is working hard when you're exercising. So your body wants your brain to be able to adapt as well, and that BDNF is part of that. It's really important for maintaining brain health as you age. It's a youthful elixir, so to speak, for your brain. It also increases neurotransmitters. These studies have been done in humans. Lactate has been shown to be the signaling molecule that increases norepinephrine, that's the neurotransmitter. It's involved in focus and attention, other things as well. And serotonin. Serotonin is important for mood, but it's also important for executive function and, more importantly, impulse control. And there have been studies showing in humans that have done moderate intensity exercise or vigorous exercise. They get more lactate from the vigorous exercise, they have more serotonin from the vigorous exercise, and they have more impulse control from the vigorous exercise. So all the reasons for your brain to work out vigorously. Lots of protocols out there for doing it. You can do the 6-minute high intensity interval training where you're doing 40 seconds all out, 20 seconds recovery, and you do that for 6 minutes. Bottom line here is just you want to go harder than you would, more than a brisk walk. We also know that it reverses the aging brain. I'm going to have to blast through this fast and get to questions. This study, I just want to mention, it was also in older adults, and I like it because it was a 1-year study. Older adults did a more moderate intensity exercise program. They were doing about 30 minutes 3 times a week of brisk walking for them. It was moderate intensity exercise, or they were doing the stretching control. The individuals that did the hour and a half a week of the brisk walking, after about a year, not only did they stave off brain atrophy, so once humans reach the age of about 65, you lose about 1 to 2% of your hippocampal brain region per year. So your brain shrinks. And it shrinks in a part of your brain where learning and executive functioning, memory, it's not good. Not only did the exercise counter that, but those individuals gained 2% of brain mass in their hippocampal regions. They also increased their BDNF. It was all correlated with improvements in cognition. So that you really can reverse brain aging if you put in some effort, if you are disciplined, and you do that vigorous intensity or moderate intensity exercise in this case. And then lastly, we're like 2 slides away, you guys. Lastly, this is stuff I'm so important, I'm so excited about. I think it's so important because there are a lot of people that really don't like exercising. They don't like going to the gym. They don't like spending a lot of time working out. What they don't realize is that they don't necessarily have to go to a gym for an hour and do that workout that they don't like. We now know that vigorous intensity exercise is so much more powerful than we once realized. In fact, there have been new data coming out. For every 1 minute of vigorous intensity exercise to prevent type 2 diabetes, you have to do 10 minutes of moderate intensity exercise, and you have to do an hour and a half of low intensity exercise, kind of just like walking around. An hour and a half for every 1 minute. So it's definitely more important for improving metabolic health, but we also know overall longevity as well. So vigorous intensity exercise, again, is so much more powerful than we thought. For every 1 minute of vigorous intensity exercise, you have to do about 4 minutes of moderate intensity exercise to lower your all-cause mortality the same by about 34%. You have to do about 8 minutes of moderate intensity exercise for every 1 minute of vigorous to get the same effect on lowering your risk for heart attacks and strokes. If you're going to do that, you have to do an hour and a half of light walking. I mean, this is an hour and a half versus 1 minute. And what's even more mind-blowing is the cancer. Like for every 1 minute that you do a vigorous intensity exercise, you have to do about 3.5 minutes of moderate intensity. So, you save a little bit of time, not much. The real kicker here is you have to do 2.5 hours of gentle walking to get the same amount of cancer reduction for every 1 minute of vigorous intensity exercise. It's insane if you tell someone that statistic. I mean, it's like, why would you not do the 1 minute of exercise? We know that individuals that do this 1 minute of vigorous, intensity exercise, vigorous exercise, if they do that 3 times, they do it 3 minutes, 3 times a day, so you're getting about 9 minutes of that. They have a 40% reduction in all-cause mortality, a 40% reduction in cancer-related mortality, and they have a 50% reduction in cardiovascular-related mortality. So this vigorous intensity, these exercise snacks, when I think about them, I think of like doing bodyweight squats or jumping jacks or burpees, right? But the studies that have been done, they're actually in people that are not doing things like that. They're doing things like chasing their puppy, playing tag with their kids, running up the stairs rather than taking the elevator, walking briskly to work rather than taking an Uber. So they're taking advantage of everyday situations to get their heart rate up. And the studies are clear. There's many of them. It's called Vigorous Intermittent Lifestyle Physical Activity, or VILPA. I like exercise snacks better. But the point is that the people that are doing these, they're getting similar benefits to people that are going and doing gym workouts. Like they've actually compared that, which is astounding. And it just, again, shows you that like your body doesn't care if you go to the gym. It just cares that you get your heart rate up. It just cares that you're breathless. It cares that you put some effort in. And so I think this is great because a lot of people don't realize that they just do 10 minutes of that vigorous exercise, and it doesn't have to be all at once. It can be 1 minute here, 1 minute there. They're getting massive benefits. So I want to take this moment. I want you guys, I know a lot of you in here probably already work out and go to gym, you're like, whatever. But I want you to feel what 1 minute feels like. So let's get up. We're going to do bodyweight squats together for 1 minute. And I really want you to put some effort in. Don't split your hands. Someone came up to me after the talk and really went hard. I know there's not a lot of room here. You can kind of turn to the side. But try. Like, put effort in, please. All right? Just to feel this, like, even though I know you guys are all, like, the healthy people and you're into it, you are, like, whatever. I just want you to feel how you feel after. Ready? We're going to just get 1, 2, 3, go. So, try to go hard. Like, See, when I said 1 minute before, you're like, whatever, right? Now you're like, okay, I get it. So, that wraps up my talk. You want to avoid micronutrient deficiencies, the main ones being vitamin D, omega-3, all the others, you somewhat can get a multivitamin and help fill the gaps. Make sure you're measuring your levels. Phytonutrients, sulforaphane is my favorite. The NRF2 pathway is very powerful. Lastly, exercise next. Come on, everyone can do it. Everyone. It's accessible, it's free, there's no reason not to. Chase your kids, chase your siblings, chase your new puppy, whatever. Find a way to move. Have fun. We have 5 minutes. Oh, do I have to pick? Okay. The gentleman right there with a big smile.
Hi, Dr. Rhonda. Huge fan of yours. Thank you for such incredible work over this period of time. Yeah. I have a question specifically on the NF and NRF2 pathway. I understand that intermittent fasting, doing aerobic exercise, all of those things also help activate that pathway. So I guess my question is, how much of that is in the balance with taking sulforaphane, and is there any data on doing that already, and if how much sulforaphane can actually help boost that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so things that are when you're putting intentional stress on your body, like fasting or exercise or eating some of these phytochemicals from plants, there's a lot of overlap in activating stress response pathways. So, for example, if you eat sulforaphane, you activate NRF2 pathway. That's doing the phase 2 detoxification, all that, right? If you eat sulforaphane, you're also activating heat shock proteins, which are robustly activated from exercise or deliberate heat exposure, like sauna. But it's much, like if you want to activate heat shock proteins, you're much more likely to get a much more robust activation by doing the deliberate heat exposure and the exercise, right? Likewise, similarly, if you are wanting to activate NRF2 to increase glutathione, to really increase the phase 2 detoxification enzymes, the reason those are so powerfully activated is because your body is trying to get rid of that sulforaphane. Then the sulforaphane is going to be more powerful at doing that. But there is a lot of overlap because your body is adapting globally, and these things are little stressors on the body to cause those adaptations, but they also have a little bit more specificity as well, where you're getting more robust activation if you do the biochemicals for the NRF2 pathway, or you do the sauna for the heat shock proteins. Yes, there's added benefits, yeah. Young lady with the strips.
Question. Definitely, we should all benefit from more omega-3s, but there are some studies indicating that more than 1 gram a day puts us at risk of atrial fibrillation. So should we be worried about taking like whatever amount?
Yeah.
For a general population advice, 4 grams is like...
Right. So the question has to do with omega-3 fatty acid supplementation and AFib. So that data is very, very complicated, and a lot of it's observational. I can talk about the randomized controlled trials in a minute. But the observational data that's made headlines has a lot of problems with it. I'll say this: the absolute increase in AFib risk is it's 0.1%. So it's not a lot. But for someone that has AFib in their family, or there's a high risk, definitely something to consider. It also seems to be really related to the form of omega-3, ethyl ester form. This is not a normal biological form of omega-3. I haven't seen a study where it's related in triglyceride form. So triglyceride form is how you find omega-3 in fish. So it's kind of weird. I'm wondering, is there something to that as well? And that's with the randomized controlled trials. Again, the absolute risk was low, but it comes down to they were supplementing with 4 grams of the ethyl ester form. So that's kind of my take. Sardines are great, yeah. Can someone? Yeah, this lady here, the lace, or...
Thank you for your talk. My question sort of skirts around the first question that we had. I wanted to ask your opinion on fasting, particularly prolonged fasting that we can harness mechanisms like autophagy. How can that fit cohesively with that conversation on the importance of these micronutrients? Essentially, you're a fan of that prolonged fasting or not? I know it can be a bit contentious, especially if we sometimes see a bit of like muscle loss that can happen with prolonged fasting. So yeah, curious about your opinion on that one.
So prolonged fasting, I mean, there's a lot of definitions, but I mean, you're probably going to be doing 48-hour, 72-hour fast, perhaps even longer. There's definitely some benefits, particularly for people that are overweight or obese. There seems to be a metabolic reset for some of the hormones, satiety hormones as well included. There's also sort of a reset in the cellular response as well. And as you mentioned, autophagy, that's kind of the clearing out of all the damaged gunk inside of your cells. That does happen when you're more prolonged fasted. And so some people kind of like to do that maybe annually, maybe twice a year, maybe quarterly, depending on like your starting point. I don't personally do it, but I do think that there could be some benefits there, particularly if you could continue with resistance training. It can be even just body weight squats. It doesn't have to be like a lot of training, but that is important because then you're at least getting that signal to your muscle. There's also some evidence, Ultra Longo at USC has done a variety of studies now showing that fasting mimicking diet, which is kind of like a low protein, low calorie diet that mimics some of the activation of these pathways that are active when you fast. He's got some pretty strong data showing that, for example, people with women with breast cancer, for example, there was a pretty recent study on this. If they did the fasting mimicking diet for 3 days before their cancer treatment, it increased the basically the effectiveness of the chemotherapy by like 80%. It was killing the tumor cells much better. And they basically had fewer side effects. They were losing less of their immune cells. Their immune activation was better. So it was like beneficial in their normal cells, and it was like killing the cancer cells, which is because fasting is activating all these beneficial pathways, so it's causing them to be resistant to stress, which is what you want. Cancer cells are totally wonky and messed up, and so they don't do that. And so I think there's all sorts of reasons and potential reasons that are beneficial, but not necessarily meant for everyone. Do we have time for any more? I see that we're good. Maybe this one guy in the corner over here.
I just wanted to ask. All right. I was smoking cannabis for a lot of years, and even when I stopped, I was still getting mucus build-up.
I'm sorry, I missed that first part. What?
I was smoking cannabis.
Oh, cannabis.
Yes, and I was still bringing up mucus even when I stopped. I was wondering if you had any good recommendations to stop that.
Oh, I don't. I'm sorry. It's outside of my scope. Maybe the guy behind you real quick, since I didn't have a great answer. Sorry.
Hi, thank you for your talk. Quickly on the exercise snacks. So I currently have a tutoring company, and my protocol for learning is a brisk walk and then meditation. Are you saying that the exercise snacks, like a minute of the squats we all did, is going to be better for learning and working memory?
Yes, for sure. 1,000%. No questions about it.